Ray Krone, you have experienced a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is how do you deal with the situation where the real perpetrator of a horrible crime, sexually motivated crime, is actually treated more leniently than the innocent people. Now, this is happening again. As we speak, the parole application, the sixth one of Jeffrey Gafoor, the real murderer of Lynette White, has begun. And it has begun behind closed doors. They have refused to hold this in public, so we don't know exactly what is being said and what evidence has been put to Gafoor and the probation officers and psychologists and psychiatrists. None of this is in the public domain. Eventually, we will get a 3-page summary of what happened in the parole hearing and what the decision is. Do you think that is acceptable?
No, and absolutely not. I think our justice system needs to be open to the public. The people who are affected the most should a convicted murderer be released back into society. There has to be protection and safeguards that the public can have their voice heard, their concerns heard. The victim's family certainly should be able to make an impact on whether this person has been rehabilitated, as our system is supposed to do, or whether it's still a danger. Everything from mental evaluations to health evaluations. So no, I'm very disappointed and actually disgusted with that type of behavior coming from a board that's responsible for seeing for public safety.
The parole board was advised by me that I was concerned at their decision. Others did so as well, and we asked them to reconsider. They didn't even acknowledge that they had received it, let alone deal with it.
It almost seems like they got a foregone conclusion and don't want to hear from the public. And again, that's an outrage that they are supposed to be representing the public, not the convicted.
The other thing that I'm a bit concerned about is the Secretary of State for Justice has confirmed that she cannot intervene, at least at the moment, that she can't tell them they must do this in public, even though that is clearly her view that they should. So the only option was judicial review. But the timing of this, and bear in mind, we're not saying you can't make whatever decision you see fit based on the evidence. We're simply saying this should be in public and this is why. But the timing of this has been so bad that it's proved impossible to actually get a judicial review on time. The hearing has actually begun before we could even lodge the judicial review proceedings, and that is partly because we were giving them a chance to reconsider.
Well, it almost again it makes me concerned about the legitimacy of this board. Or do they have an outside influences other than the public? Or I mean, did they intentionally delay so that you couldn't have a judicial review? Because surely, I think most of all of us believe that there should be oversight in all these different government agencies. There has to be some type of oversight in case of misdeeds, of miscarriages of justice, and just improprieties or not following the law. Somebody needs to have, or some group committee needs to be overseeing these aspects. And when it seems like now that they made sure that to be able to be avoided such scrutiny, it really makes me suspicious.
The next thing about all of this is that the judicial process is such that they will now go ahead with the parole hearing, the sixth one. The relatives of the Cardiff Five, in particular, the Cardiff Five who survived, and members of the community of Butte Town, which was affected by this murder, will not get the chance to give victim impact statements. They were denied that opportunity when we were setting the tariff. or when the tariff was being set, and now they're being denied this opportunity again to be heard in relation to the parole hearing. So the question is, can you say that a system properly respects victims of crime and indeed society and protects them if they're not being given a say?
I don't know. I mean, that is a very huge question right there. Who exactly are they working for? Is this the same group, the same members that actually heard the hearing, what, 2 years ago? There's new members involved?
It is likely the panel will be different. They haven't said who constituted the panel. Can probably ask and find out, but we don't know for definite. But my suspicion is it probably isn't.
Wow, and again, what an outrage. They have not heard any of the previous testimonies and previous hearings, you know, any statements that were
No,
available
no,
then.
no. They will. Let me explain this process. What happens is roughly every 2 years, up to 2 years, the Secretary of State for Justice will submit a dossier to the parole board instructing them to give a prisoner a hearing for parole. That dossier will contain all sorts. It will have psychological evidence. It will have the probation services evidence. It will have the person themselves, and they will have access to all this information. So there will almost certainly be a summary of the previous ones in the dossier. One of the problems is we don't know exactly what is in the dossier. What we know is, however they summarize it, is no way going to be adequate because they're essentially summarizing the process, the application, the evidence, and the decision inside of 3 pages. And they're saying the dossier itself is over 1,000 pages long.
Wow, how are they even going to read all that and take it in? Just amazing. Again, I mean, we have laws, regulations that are to be followed. Again, it's for the safety of the public when it comes to the justice system. And it sounds like some of those safety precautions are being bypassed here, and it certainly would be concerning. And as a victim, I would be very, very upset if my family could not profess their anger, their outrage, their experience, their issues with that board who's about to release a person that killed their loved one. I just think they, above all, should have the absolute right to be heard. What a
They
shame it's not
can, but sorry, let me just explain this a bit. The process is that the parole board must hear an application when told to consider it by the Secretary of State for Justice. But victims do have the right to be heard, but they have to contact the probation service. The victim support scheme or contact scheme is run by the probation service. Well, the problem is nobody knows this, and you wouldn't anticipate it. You would think that if you were wanting to make an application to the parole board to be heard, for at the parole hearing, you would do it to the parole board. But that's not the correct procedure. Problem is, nobody knows this. You actually have to contact the parole board to find out the procedure and then contact the probation service and the right department of the probation service. They will direct you to the person that will help you, and they will then help you. But they decide if you are a victim. So you
wow.
have a case like this where the judge who sentenced Gafoor to life imprisonment and imposed the tariff actually says that the most important aggravating factor was that Gafoor was prepared to allow men that he knew to be innocent because it was his crime, not theirs, to go to prison for his crime. That's the most serious aggravating factor, according to the judge. So, my point with this is if the judge is saying that, if the chief constable of the police force that got this case wrong in the first place and caused this miscarriage of justice have apologized, and when I say apologize, it is a letter from the chief constable himself at the time to each of them and to the victim's family as well, all acknowledge that these people are victims, how on earth can there be any doubt that they
Yeah.
are victims and that they should be allowed to have their say? Because to not give them a say is essentially another slap in the face on this appalling case.
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's really a need for some kind of victims advocacy group that would actually be able to inform them about every one of these steps, every one of these different directions, hallways, rooms, offices that you have to go to get the proper information and to get the proper clearance to use your rights to testify. And again, it sounds like a lot of circumstances have worked against the victims and the victims' families, that almost again make it suspicious that the system does not want to allow them to be part of this decision making.
The strange thing with our criminal justice system is we have a victim uh, group. I've forgotten what it's called now. I should remember it, but I've forgotten. They basically run the rights of victims and advocate for victims. There is also a victims commissioner, and this group I mentioned is essentially partly informed by the police. But what seems to have happened here is there are a number of victims. It is to some extent unusual because you don't normally get cases where you've had a terrible miscarriage of justice, an acknowledged miscarriage of justice because they found the real perpetrator,
Hmm.
and then you have the situation where they are not properly acknowledged as victims. So you have many, many, many more victims than in most normal cases, for want of a better way of expressing it. The end result of this is, at the same time, they do not seem to appreciate the extent of damage to these people as individuals and as human beings. Their lives have been completely ruined. They're not the same. They were easygoing people, not before all of this happened. They would associate with other people. They had no great problems talking to people and associating with them. That's no longer the case. Now they are deeply, deeply damaged by what happened to them. And our system is essentially saying, we're sorry for what happened to you, but we've let you go. What more do you want?
Yeah.
We don't recognize the situation that you are in. We don't accept and acknowledge what our system has done to you, has damaged you greatly. And if you want any rights, it's up to you to come to us to get them. They don't
Boy,
do that.
certainly lacking in compassion and consideration for those families and those victims. It's just a shameful, shameful situation.
Now, I have been dealing with the parole board for quite a long time because my position on all of this is I actually don't blame the parole board if they decide to release Jeffrey Gafoor. I am assuming they will be doing that on the basis of they have looked at the evidence, they have tested him uh, in the community, and they have come to the conclusion, based on all of this evidence, that they believe it is safe to release him, and that's their function.
Mhm.
But you have the situation where the parole board doesn't act in its own interests. Because my point with all of this is the public should not be angry with the parole board in
Mm.
terms of whether they decide to release him or not, whether they decide to test him in the community or not. They are doing nothing wrong on that respect. Where the anger should be directed, and this is my opinion, is at the criminal justice system as a whole and at politicians who will not deal with the real problem, which is The tariff system is not being applied properly by judges. They have the power to do it. They have several things in Schedule 21 that say you can impose a tariff of whatever length you see fit, and you can do it by taking any aggravating factor into account as long as you haven't used it and setting the starting point, and you can build up the tariff all the way up to a whole life tariff. It's never happened in any of these vindication cases, and this is not the only one. It is the first one that has actually got to the point of having parole applications, but they refuse to deal with this. And this is where the real problem is, because nobody is actually saying, well, the real problem is the politicians and judges. And that what we now need is to say, if you have these powers, use them. If you refuse to use these powers, then your right to decide whether to use them or not needs to be taken away. And it has to be included as a matter of fact. One of the first things that happens is this is how much time a prisoner will have to serve as an aggravating factor because they allowed innocent people to go to prison for their crime. So, in other words, what I'm saying is if the government and the judges will not do this voluntarily when they have the powers, then it has to be the decision on whether they do it or not has to be taken away from them.
I think that's some excellent points there you made. And again, this is a huge, powerful system, the justice system, from the very bottom police officers to the right on up to the top judges and final people in government that oversee all these operate. And I think if they don't know how to fix it or refuse to acknowledge that it happened, they're just going to try to cover it up and hope it goes away. It takes people like you, it takes people like these victims' families to be able to have their voices heard, to speak up and say this is wrong, and what families could this happen to next? How far is this going to go until somebody puts a stop to it and we start actually making those laws, changing those laws that are fraught with mistakes and inconsiderate actions towards the victims' families, who need the most consideration of all. And again, for the safety of the public, not to be releasing people that do not qualify in any way or means to be out there in public safely anymore. This sounds like it's something that government is concerned about keeping a lid on it rather than fixing a true problem.
One other problem that's emerged from all of this is while the Secretary of State for Justice does not have the power to demand a public hearing, the parole board can carry on, have their hearing, reach their decision, and then the Secretary of State for Justice can say, I don't like this decision and I'm asking you to reconsider. And at that point, the public also would be able to judicially review it if they can show that the decision is procedurally improper, irrational, or unlawful. So essentially, we have a situation where this has taken too long to actually allow the public to have the redress that they should have. But if the result is that the man is released, then they can actually begin the process and possibly put right a wrong.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think the media, I hope the media is getting involved in this, and I hope that the victims' families will not just, quit and give up and shake their heads and walk away in frustration from this, if that would happen, if that scenario does come to be. And again, I think all of us would like to hope that they will make the decision that this man will not be released yet. Again, we don't know. There's a lot of questions up in the air right now. Um, but I hope that somehow the victims' families' suffering is eased rather than aggravated. And it seems like this could be one that's just going to aggravate their suffering and prolong their ability to recover, if in some sense a loss that of human life and even decency to them by a system that failed them once by convicting the wrong people, and then again having to go through and find out it was another person. I know in my case, the victim's family, mom came up to me with tears in her eyes saying, "Forgive me, I just believed what they told me," thinking all along that I was a murderer, and later on to find out that somebody else had done it and come to apologize to me. She lost her daughter. She lost a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was in prison, but to have her have to come and apologize to me for something that was the system's fault. They didn't come and apologize to her, but she felt compelled to apologize to me. And again, that's the emotions of individuals. We care. We have that sense of compassion, concern. Our government agency should, but I'm concerned that they do not.
In this particular case, the chief constable has apologized. Members of the victim's family are saying they want this hearing to be in public and that they consider it a gross injustice to the wrongly accused people as well. But we have a system where our criminal justice system is ignoring itself in this way, because you've got the judge saying this is all wrong and it needs to be looked at. This is very, very serious. You've got the chief constable of the police force at the time that they found out they'd got it wrong, writing and delivering apologies to all five and the victim who were wrongly accused and the victim's family as well. But now you have a system where they they set the tariff and they won't do anything about it. And my view with all of this is ridiculous. I've been dealing with this since they said it in 2005. So it's nearly 20 years they've had to deal with this thing, which you knew was coming. You knew there was going to be the parole applications, and you knew how they were actually going to conduct the parole application and what the parole application is. But you have a parole board who refuse to actually say, will you please stop blaming us? We don't have a choice. This is what we were set up to do. If you don't like it, talk to the government and change the parole system. Tell them, if you want a system where you can never get out of prison if you are convicted of the thing, then you say that to the government and let them make the decision. But if you do that, you will get a system which is totally unfair, because innocent people will basically never have a chance.
Yeah.
They will basically be expected, and even under the current system, they don't have a chance, because if you require innocent people or any convicted person to basically say, I'm sorry I did that, this is how I did it, I won't do it again, you can trust me. In cases like this and yours, it would involve a lie. And that lie is a lie that is going to mean the public is at great risk because the real perpetrator is still at liberty. So we need a system that basically allows the innocent a chance, but also lets the public say, we don't want so and so released. Do
Yeah.
you have anything like that in the United States, or not?
Our separation of powers are a little different. Or each state governor, which is there's 50 states, so that's 50 governors that choose the parole board in their state. It's usually made up anywhere from I'd say 4 to 6 people that are appointed by a governor for the duration of that governor's term, usually 4 years. So each state has a little bit of different of a setup how that goes. Now we do have life without parole. I mean, we do have sentences where there is no review; they will never be released. We also still have the death penalty in America, where there is no release from that except death. I know I was subject to the death penalty, and thankfully for DNA was released. But our system is more individualized to each state's rights and chosen that way. So instead of having the power invested in just one small group, there's a small group in every state. So that's a whole lot of people making those decisions. Some states are probably better than others. Obviously, again, human nature being what it is. And governors, I can tell you for a fact in Arizona, it was hard to get parole because the governors were always a tough on crime type, where they appointed people to their parole board that did not want to let people out. And
Mm.
so there, again, it was at 50 people's individuals, 50 governors' whim of who they put on that parole board, and they had sole discretion to decide. It wasn't an election, it wasn't a public opinion poll. It was that governor's determination who he wants on his parole board. So again, with that diversity, there's always going to be problems, good problems and bad problems. But so far, there really hasn't been any push to correct, amend, or assist the procedures that it really hasn't arisen. And the circumstances that you've described there in UK is certainly something that I would think would, if it came up here, would certainly be making the news. That the
Mm.
public was no longer involved in a decision that directly affected them. It just seems so wrong.
If you had the opportunity, knowing what you now know about the parole system, the tariff system, and how the real perpetrators and innocent people are being treated in Britain, what would you say to the parole board, to judges and politicians if you were given the opportunity to address them?
I think I'd tell them, I said, you can't imagine the shoes that we've walked in, that victims' families have to wear after these horrible consequences. And we're trusting in you to try to empathize and feel that pain and suffering that we feel, to help you make in your determination and judgment. It has to be fair. It has to be open to the public, to those that were most severely affected by this. And I would hope that you would understand, if it was your loved one, if it was your daughter, your son, your husband, what exactly would you want your government to do for you? Because you are the government and you are the one that can do it for us.
Ray Crone, thank you very much.